Ook Enterprises CEO Louis Giraldo joins us as guest host to celebrate Anti-Ransomware Day and discuss a new network-vetted e-commerce marketplace, news from Dell, and more, plus a special guest interview with Wolfgang Goerlich on big security in a small business world. It's ChannelPro Weekly, episode 146, Hips That Make Men Lie. Hello, and welcome to ChannelPro Weekly, episode 146. My name is Matt Whitlock, technology editor, online director, and your host of this fine program for you, the VARs, the integrators, the managed service providers, the IT resellers, the IT consultants. If you are doing technology with other businesses and making money that way, you are probably in the right place. Who is frequently in the wrong place, but in the right place today is our fantastic guy who keeps the content that you enjoy here at ChannelPro flowing and that keeps the trains on time. We like to call him a conductor, but then he puts on the outfit and gets a little whistle, and we don't need to watch that because he really also loves the little change dispenser that you use on the side. You know, you'll have to tell us all about it, Rich. Executive editor Rich Freeman.
Hello, and actually, and I say this, with shame, no pride whatsoever. I am not the guy you want to keep the trains on time. I'm like perpetually 2 minutes late to everything, it seems, but I try.
Well, it's as easy. We just move all the clocks forward, 2 minutes, and we're good to go. We're good to go. Well, great to have you here with us, Rich. Rich, we also have another awesome guest with us this week. We're so excited to have him on. He's the senior consultant and CEO of Ook Enterprises, Luis Giraldo. Welcome, Luis.
Thank you so much, Matt and Rich. It's great to see you again, Rich. Matt, it's the first time we meet, but it's obviously awesome to get to hang out. And thanks for all this great energy you're bringing to the show already.
Oh, good. Well, we're super glad to have you on. Now, I gotta start off by asking you. In the background, I see lots of stuff, but it's not like the normal stuff we usually see, which is like degrees and books and like computers. I see like music stuff back there. What's all that about?
Yeah, I had this previous career as a professional musician, and so I still keep a little bit of music year round, some keyboards primarily to get the chance to play occasionally. I used to tour playing keyboards with Shakira in Colombia before I moved to Canada back in '97. So that was a little while ago, but still pretty much a highlight of my life and of my musical career. And so yeah, that's the reason for the music gear around here.
Well, now that begs for a question that I'm going to save for later when we play 5 questions, now that I actually think about this, because that is very, very interesting, and I want to know more, but we're going to save that to the end of the show. Luis, for those who may not be familiar with you, other than the fact that they know that you're a former musician or still kind of dabble in that, tell us about Ook Enterprises and a little bit about you.
Yeah, so, I got into IT actually a little bit by accident. I was primarily doing professional music and performing. I was doing shows around town, that kind of thing. And at one point I had started playing on the cruise ships back in '99. I spent about 5-6 years doing the cruise ships on and off. And post 9/11, when the entertainment industry kind of took a little bit of a nosedive, I went back on the ships and spent another 3 years there. About 2005, I got a little tired of that and said, I really need to be in the city and spend some time doing some other kind of stuff. And I found work as a retail sales guy at a computer store. And it was a Mac store, and what they wanted was an audio expert or a music expert that could speak to the garage bands and the stuff that Apple was coming out with at the time. And I'd been really into Logic Pro, which was this German software company that Apple had acquired, and they turned Apple or Logic into Logic Pro. And so they brought me on. I spent about a year selling computers, but realized there was a little bit of a gap. There was all these people that came into the store asking for help. So when I left that job about a year later, I turned around and offered the Mac reseller a gig where I would do the setups and deliveries of all their iMacs for all their customers. And this sort of kicked off a business of doing residential computer setups, which slowly turned into doing the occasional business office. And then over time sort of evolved into almost only offering business level services to business type customers. So that was kind of the start, the genesis of Ook, and that was back in 2006. In 2011 or 2009 rather, I started offering white label Mac support to other PC support companies or managed services IT companies here in Vancouver. I had read in this local magazine called Business Magazine or business in Vancouver rather, there was a company called C.Networks, now known as Fully Managed. You guys might actually be familiar with the name Fully Managed because it's one of
Yeah.
the largest MSPs. Anyways, back then it was a 10-person company. They were sort of a PC or Windows only managed services provider. And I said, hey, listen, you may not know this yet, but you're going to get some CEO that's going to call you and be like, hey, I just bought a MacBook Air because they had just come out around that time, and I need you to make it work on the network. And you're not going to know what to do with it. And I'd like you to keep my number on file when that happens so you can give me a call. And not 2 months later did they actually put that call and be like, hey, so what you said happened. We need some help with these, one of our mining clients and getting their CEO all set up with their laptop. So that started a relationship of us doing, or myself doing white label Mac support for this managed services company. And 2 years later, they acquired us and I came over to become sort of the Apple practice leader inside of Fully Managed. And that kicked off a whole bunch of projects from starting the cloud delivery of firewalls with the initial rollout of the Meraki MX50. This was back in 2011 or late 2011. It was the first, I still remember how much people said, oh, cloud managed routers, this is never going to work. Nobody wants to have anything managed in the cloud. And so we were kind of driving that initiative a lot. And yeah, spent about a year fully managed and came back out on my own and launched my own business again and continued that path. And so, yeah, grew it a little bit, brought on a business partner in 2013, a second business partner in 2016. We did a small acquisition in 2018. Now we're a company of 5 people doing a bunch of small work or great work for small and medium businesses in the greater Vancouver area. And that's the story. And I'm sticking to it.
Very cool. Now, do you focus exclusively now on business, or do you still kind of
Yeah.
do the occasional residential setup here and there?
Well, we do extend that to some of the stakeholders of the businesses we support. Occasionally, they'll sort of bring us in and be like, "Hey, by the way, my wife at home is my Wi-Fi at home, not my wife at home. My Wi-Fi at home is not working, and I need some help." And so we'll obviously extend our services to stakeholders and things like that. But we have definitely made sort of the transition to business-only services.
Now, for a while there in that story, you had 2 gigs going simultaneously. So I know there are people in our audience who are familiar with you from that other gig that you had for a while. So just kind of let people know
Yeah,
what
yeah.
that was about.
Yeah, so rewinding back to 2013, when I brought on my first business partner, it was evident that there was going to be a challenge with sharing information and documentation. And as good as I was with text files and things where I could keep track of the things that were important about documentation, I feel like I definitely felt like there was need for something more structured. And I remember I did a proof of concept in FileMaker to build a little database to keep track of our IT documentation and stuff like that. And so I actually started a project with a developer out of San Francisco who had met through another Mac related colleague. And we developed this thing called Monkeybox. And Monkeybox was initially just going to be an internal project for us to have a documentation platform that would make it easy for us to share amongst ourselves. But I got tons of interest from some of my other colleagues. And so we built in the multi-tenancy, we built in the, being able to sell it as a subscription, and people started to buy it. And so this sort of became a little bit of a side project of having documentation on the side as a platform, as a software as a service. And roll into 2014, and Chris Day, who I'd worked with at Fully Managed, started his effort on IT Glue, and he grew that like a rocket, which was just absolutely amazing to see. And the first couple years were a little rocky, a little slower, but once 2016 came around, IT Glue just hit this growth curve that was impossible to stop. But what he saw is that obviously their team needed to bring on somebody to help with the product, and it was kind of critical that that person also knew the space of being in a managed service provider business and all that stuff. So he kind of pitched me on the idea of merging or acquiring Monkeybox and coming over to help build the product team at IT Glue. And we did that, and that was 2017. Early 2017, IT Glue acquired Monkeybox, and that was the beginning of building out a larger product team at IT Glue. 2 years later, Kaseya acquires IT Glue, as this is all known, and so made the transition to Kaseya, and I spent about a year there, leaving last January, at the end of January. So back to my consulting roots and helping small businesses do their thing.
And one of the great things, so the whole time that you were at IT Glue, and you were VP of product, if I remember right there. So I mean, you were in charge of developing that platform, and that whole time you were still also you still had OOC. You were an MSP as well as this head development guy at IT Glue. And I remember interviewing you in your capacity at IT Glue, and you would, test drive new functionality in your business. None of this was theoretical for you. You were actually basing everything on your own experiences as an MSP.
Yeah, and I think what's sort of poignant about this story is that I came over to IT Glue and I had never used the platform, and but I knew that there was this absolute need, or that documentation had to become a core part of what MSPs or IT services providers use in their stack, and so. And I knew that Monkeybox had perhaps not reached the point where it could be developed further, and ITGlue was already on this rocket growth curve, and so I thought, what a great opportunity to sort of skip hop over a lot of the growth pain and get onto this train that is going already pretty fast. And so, yes, definitely, it was one of those things where I sort of set out the requirement of being able to stay involved with the MSP right from the get-go. But Chris really understood that those two things were, and I hate this word in this context, but symbiotic, because the knowledge of the MSP was going to inform a lot of what the decisions that were made on the documentation side, and being able to test documentation in real world was going to be critical to actually making the good and right decisions for the product as well. So I think that worked really well. Obviously, I was hyper focused on IT Glue, and a lot of my work there also became the public speaking and the thought leadership around my knowledge of being an MSP and having grown the business there. So it was an interesting, good relationship. And Kaseya understood this as well, and I remained a bit in that capacity of doing some strategy after I moved away from the product role. But yeah, definitely it was doing both at the same time.
So now you're back to being 100% focused on the managed services business. So here, and we've been discussing this with guest hosts every week now for a while. Here we are in these crazy times, industry totally shaken up. How has the whole coronavirus situation impacted Ook and Ook's clients so far?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think most IT providers, and I'm in the channels of Slack and other places where they hang out talking about business and these things. And there was definitely sort of a period where, oh, this is not going to affect us. This is going to be a passing thing, or it's not really as serious as it's being made out to be. To basically transitioning to everybody feeling the pinch in some way or another. For us, I think a few of our customers that were in retail type operations, either a retail store or a location that accepts lots of client visitors, were forced to shutter their doors. And so because we have malleable agreements that go up and down based on the staffing of those customers, we definitely saw some customers have to reduce their staff. They laid off, 40 people in some cases. And so we had to adjust some of those contracts, which obviously meant some lost revenue. But at the same time, we knew that, and we're trying to look past the issue a bit and not too hyper focused on this initial crunch. But we knew that at some point they'd have to reopen and that they'd go back to their operations. And fortunately, most of our customers are long-standing businesses that are well equipped to weather, a 3-4 month kind of ordeal of this nature. So a lot of this time that we spent has been on just facilitating their move to remote work for those that could do it, and just having honest conversations about what their expectations are of us in this type of situation, especially where we offer the ability to move their contract commitments up and down based on staffing. There was just no position that we had of saying, well, sorry, you can't, reduce your contract or anything like that. So I think the flexibility was welcome. And just staying in the communication loop with clients and making sure that we're addressing their needs, and keeping them sort of thinking about the future and not just too focused on the now, I think has been key. Because even talking about how are you going to return to work in a few weeks has been important for us to have capacity planning of like how are we going to get all these people with their computers moved back to the offices and that kind of thing.
Yeah, no, that's great actually that you're being proactive about that, having those conversations now, even if, and I don't know what, you're in Vancouver, right?
Yeah, Vancouver, Canada.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't know what the situation is like in terms of when people will be able to go back to the office, even if that date hasn't been very specifically defined. It's like it's never too early to start thinking ahead to that, especially given, what everyone went through when offices were closed essentially, unexpectedly in most parts of the country, and there wasn't a lot of time to get prepared. Makes a lot of sense to start getting prepared now.
Yeah, now what I will say is that I think we've gotten lucky with the relationships that we have with some of our customers that have been with us, 5, 10 plus years in some cases, in that there's always been sort of the impetus to have business level conversations and how can we all grow together, and in many cases I'm have close business friendships with many of our customer stakeholders, and this really does change a little bit of the dynamic of those relationships because they're truly rooted in a different kind of trust, and that's not so much of the transactional type of IT relationship that can happen occasionally. But in one such case, we had one of our customers was a digital marketing agency. They thought, we kind of have to turn this thing on its head. We're going to see a need for people to engage more quickly on some of their projects and not have to have these big scopes of work for like a marketing project or a marketing ad buy or things like that. How can we short circuit that and get people some services faster? And so our customer launched an e-commerce site that offers some of their services in sort of bite-sized consumable services, very short scope of work, easy to engage and consume and easy to deploy. Um, and so their genius thought around this was actually not to do that, but more to involve some of their community partners that they've been, so trusting of over the last few years to do the same and operate sort of as a commerce workplace for many different kinds of services. So they brought in some HR management, some business consulting, and they brought us to offer some IT services in their e-commerce workplace as well. So they call this the Tin Can. It's a tincan.shop is their e-commerce platform for this. And so what I was mostly interested in was actually the idea that you could leverage your business network to create that sort of halo of trust around your services. Because it's really hard to go at this alone, to be honest. As a consultant, I think one of the biggest things that we rely on is the word of mouth referral and the trust that we create with customers that want to work with us. And to have businesses of their stature saying, hey, we trust these guys, we love the work they do for us, and we think you should use them as well, is such a big endorsement for us. And so it's been really cool to see that happening. A lot of people have picked up on that also just from the innovation aspect of like, hey, let's rewire ourselves to think a little bit differently about how we offer services. And IT companies have also been, I'll be honest, we have suddenly revisited our stance on doing more short scopes of work and not necessarily have to engage on these big contracts that are like 1+ years of engagements, and just be a little more nimble and making sure that we don't slow ourselves down and become our worst enemy of getting new business.
Yeah, it's the e-commerce part of that absolutely fascinates me. So I'll say that there's a direct line between you being on the podcast and you reaching out to me last weekend or the week before. Time is all a blur these days, but you contacted me not too long ago and you said, hey, we've just gotten involved in this interesting venture. We've got a service that we're listing on this new e-commerce site, and it was just a model for an MSP that I'd never heard of before, and it's that e-commerce piece of it. So it's not even like your website. You're listed in a marketplace that somebody else is operating. IT services in your case, other kinds of services in there together. I mean, talk a little bit about what it is that you have listed on Tin Can right now, just so that people get an idea for the kind of thing that you're thinking,
Sure.
People might consume that way.
And it's funny because we could have easily put these two things on our own website and just to have a little checkout link and a button to pay. So, the e-commerce part of it is actually not what is groundbreaking so much as it is the idea that we have a group of businesses that are together supporting each other in that trust factor. So we offer two services. One was basically a 2 to 3 hour consulting session where we can address any type of topic. A client or prospect might have a situation where they want to talk about, hey, we have this thing where we want to move to Office 365 from our on-premises Exchange situation, and they just want a third eye on the thing and the project and how to do that. So, a very easy to consume 2 hour, 3 hour consulting gig. But again, it's not so much that we can offer it online. It was the fact that there was an environment where they could say, yeah, I've known Major Tom. They trust these guys. I automatically trust these guys. And it was easier to consume that way. And then the second service is a more comprehensive IT audit. So we do a 29-point IT audit, and this is sort of the kind of thing where somebody might need to check in on what's going on in their business, or they're getting prepared for some kind of certification or compliance. It could be PCI, it could be SOC, it could be something else like that. There's a lot of development being brought into Vancouver, and so we're seeing a lot of opportunities with essentially development offices of larger software companies that are popping up here and need to continue their SOC compliance requirements or ISO requirements. And so we help do IT audits to make sure that their stuff is remaining compliant. Yeah, so those are the two services. And so obviously them being a digital marketing agency, they kind of led us down the path of, hey, let's write a blog article for this. And that's the thing that I sent you. I labored quite a bit over that because, I like a little bit of writing, but professional writing is a whole other ball game. And so, my hat's off to you, Rich, for all the writing that you do, because it really takes some effort to do it consistently, to do it well, and to provide interesting content for people to consume. Man, it was hard. And it took me 2 weeks to just come up with this, 100-word blog post. So I definitely feel the pain.
So from a partnering with partners kind of standpoint, I mean, do the participants in this project have an agreement in terms of who's going to market it or promote it and how? I mean, are you collaborating around awareness as well?
Yeah, I think everybody has a role to play there for sure. We definitely have leaned on Major Tom to sort of lead the marketing effort side of things, because they obviously understand how to do the marketing piece, and especially where there's content related or content marketing. So they've given us recommendations, and one of the things that we talked about early on was like, hey, here's essentially a schedule or agenda of the things that you will want us they wanted us to do. So post on Twitter here, and post on LinkedIn here, and post this kind of link with this type of headline. But they also gave us a lot of room to continue to talk in our voice. In other words, they didn't impose a specific style or anything. And so I think that's what's interesting about IT marketing, is that each business sort of creates its own voice and personality. It's important to be able to carry that through any of the efforts. So we definitely welcome that support, because, I don't post on Twitter very often except to complain about, the parking enforcement. But it's just one of those things where, yeah, the business consumption of that type of marketing or content is a little bit different, and it requires some expertise.
So very early on in the tin can story, but I mean, are you getting any traction, and are the customers who are responding to that any different from the customers you might get otherwise, or what you expected to see?
It's early. We've literally just launched this in the last few days. And so there's definitely some media attention, because, it is changing a little bit of how people have been accustomed to engage for this type of service. But, you talk about commoditization, and this is kind of, I think what was interesting about doing this is that people talk about IT being commoditized, and that everybody sort of expects a certain type of service to be delivered to them. And it's tough when you do that, because it becomes a race to the bottom, and you have to consistently try to create additional value on top of what that commoditized service is. And so we thought, let's offer that in a sandbox, if you will. Let's do it with these two services, and it's just an opportunity for us to get to meet some new people, expand our pipeline effectively, and be able to sort of engage at a different level once people have started that conversation with us. So we're hoping it'll take on, and Major Tom has seen some engagement from it as well, and we'll hope it'll continue to grow. I think it'll be an important dynamic that remains part of our go-to-market strategy in the future as well.
Awesome, and we'll definitely keep an eye on that and report as we see that growth. And we wish you the best of luck with it, and hope it goes really well. We're gonna take a break. We're gonna move on. Well, actually, we're not gonna go to a break, but we're gonna move on here, and we got some news stories and some other stories we're gonna talk about. So we're super glad you're here. We know that you'll probably have a little bit to chime in here and there as we go through these. So we're gonna strap in and get going to that. So Rich, the first news story that we're gonna talk about is about Dell. And as a reminder to those who are listening and or watching us on YouTube, we put links to all of these stories that we are going to talk about on our show notes page at channelpronetwork.com. So make sure you go there And then you can read along, because we'll kind of scratch the surface on the news here and kind of talk about our thoughts on it. But if you want to actually get all of the detail, go there, go to those links, and follow along as we go. Dell has some new computers. We talked about this last week. They had some consumer laptops, the new XPS 15 and 17, which looks so nice, Rich. I'm so jealous of the XPS 17. But now they have some commercial PCs that you alluded to. Let's talk about those.
Yeah, exactly. Another week, another set of Dell PCs. This time it's commercial PCs. The timing behind all of this coming this time of year is, coming into 2020, Dell thought they were going to be doing their big partner event right around now. So they were kind of building towards a launch wave this time of year, and, they stuck to that timing. So they've got new laptops, new desktops, new workstations that they announced this week. Lots of 10th gen Intel Core processors, some pretty impressive battery life on some of these models. Very interested to know what kind of jumps out at you two guys about this product wave. I'll call attention to the first product that I wrote about in my story on this, which maybe is just selfishly comes from the perspective that it jumped out at me a little bit. So ordinarily, I travel quite a lot, which means when I'm shopping for a laptop, the three things that I care about are weight, battery life, and durability, because I'm absolutely brutal with hardware. And so typically I wind up with something that's, in that 13-inch, maybe 14-inch kind of range. I don't really even look at 15-inch laptops. But Dell has a 15-inch Latitude laptop that they introduced this week. It's the Latitude 9510. Part of their 9000 series, and the way it works with the Latitude is like the core kind of business laptop brand for Dell. The 9000 series is the premium stuff. The 7000 series is a little bit more mainstream, and when you get, I think it's the 3000 series is the value price series. So we're talking about a premium product from their standpoint here. 15-inch unit, starting weight of 3.1 pounds.
Wow.
And up to 34 hours of power. So for me, the other thing is Dell, and this came up last week with the XPS units. Dell has the Infinity Edge display technology, so there's practically no bezel around the display, which allows the entire case to be smaller. And so, a 15-inch laptop actually isn't as big as a typical 15-inch laptop. And these numbers are off the top of my head because I looked this up. I was really curious. So I am blogging or podcasting from a 13-inch HP laptop. And I believe the width on this is 32 and a half centimeters. And the width of the 15-inch Latitude 9510, it was something like 34 and change. So, I mean, maybe 2 centimeters wider, and you get this 15-inch screen instead of the 13-inch screen that I've got going here. And, it's a half a pound, maybe a little more than a half a pound heavier. But, boy, for the first time, I'm looking at a 15-inch laptop thinking that could be an option for me.
So Rich, the question that I sort of begs to ask is whether ChannelPro is going to buy you a Dell laptop to do this research properly.
I think that is an outstanding suggestion. And I'm glad I didn't come up with it. So I will bring this to the boss. We've got someone who thinks a wise move on your part would be to set me up with one of these.
Well, it's funny how IT providers get into the habit of deploying certain things for certain purposes, and our shop has certainly been no different. We've actually been fans of Dell servers primarily for the last few years, and we kind of don't go outside that lane for server deployment. But we have never typically deployed Dell laptops. We do workstations occasionally, but we have actually focused on Lenovo a bunch over the last few years. But in the recent weeks, I actually set up one of those 9000 series XPS computers, and I got to say I was impressed with everything from the packaging to how the computer itself feels, the weight of the lid, like the weight ratio of the lid versus the bottom case, because there's so many of the more value priced laptops, you lift the lid and the whole thing comes up with it, and so I was actually impressed on many levels with what Dell is coming out with. So I'm definitely curious to see more of what they're doing. The other thing is Dell has some really powerful tools for IT providers and technicians with their expert network stuff, where you can actually go in and self-initiate cases where you need a computer replacement part. You can actually certify, so you can even do some of your own IT part replacement if you can certify as a provider. So they definitely are doing a lot of work to enable IT providers to deliver service more efficiently and stuff like that. So I'm very interested to see how Dell grows that part of their platform.
Yeah, the Dell Expert Network that you're referring to is a whole other story, just a very interesting story that we've written about them some at ChannelPro, because I'm not really aware of any program quite like it elsewhere in the industry right now, where they identified an audience of people like yourself, MSPs who don't really think of themselves as hardware resellers, don't even really want to be in the hardware business necessarily, but they need certain kinds of help from a hardware vendor, and so they created this program that really caters to that particular need. That's pretty interesting. So just as a point of comparison, we were talking about the 9510, 15-inch units. So there's a new 9410 14-inch laptop, 3 pounds, so like a tenth of a pound lighter than the 15-inch unit, 27 hours of power, so very good battery life if you actually get that from the device, but less than the 15-inch unit. Starting price on the 14-inch model is going to be $1,799. The 15-inch is just $100 more. So I don't know, interesting there. Now, Luis, you say you deal with workstations sometimes. This product wave also includes some new workstations, and there too, from Dell's standpoint, what they're trying to do is come up with devices that have the power typically associated with a workstation, but are maybe a little bit more portable. And so they introduced, so their 5000 series of precision workstations now for the first time has a 17-inch model. Again, it has a 95% display to body ratio, so it's a compact chassis that they're dealing with there. 4.7 pound starting weight, NVIDIA Quadro RTX 3000 graphics. It's got the horsepower, but in a smaller kind of unit. And there's a 15-inch as well, the 5550, that's 4 pounds, 92% display to body ratio. So a couple of interesting kind of compact, portable workstation options that came out this week too.
Yeah, Rich, so I'll point out a couple things that I found interesting. I think you hit it right on that the 9510 is a very interesting product, and one of the things that I'm really like about Dell is how they are allowing for these notebook sizes with larger screens that generally would have been a lot bigger and are a lot bigger in terms of their competitors. So as you said, you can consider a 15-inch notebook to carry around, where like I gave up the 15.6-inch form factor ages ago because it's just too big to tote around when you're traveling. But I could look at an XPS 17 and I'm like, hey, you know what? I could carry that around. That's not bad, and that's a nice big display for that. I did find it interesting though, and I don't know if you caught this, Rich, that the 9510 which is their business class products, they chose a 16:9 display as opposed to the 16:10 displays on the XPS. You'd think it would be reversed. The consumers would want the 16:9 as opposed to the 16:10 more than businesses would. So I found that to be an odd choice.
I was wondering what you were going to say about that, and I have no explanation. I did notice that. I have no explanation for it personally. I'm trying to look, because if I remember right, the workstations do have 16:10.
They do, yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. What the thought was behind that.
Yeah, not sure there either. I also want to point out too that one of the more exciting things about this launch lineup that we're going to see, and we're seeing this in not just Dell in this case, but we're seeing battery life now, not in the tens of hours, which we used to look at a 12-hour or 14-hour battery life, and we're really impressed by that number. But 34 hours of battery life, I'm sure that's synthetic testing and whatnot, but if that even can deliver a true 18 plus hours of solid full productivity battery life, that is amazing.
There's no particular science to this, but I always just take whatever number the manufacturer advertises and cut it in half. But
yeah, I mean, that's a smart way of looking at it. Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, that's pretty amazing. 17 hours of battery. I will take that. I remember I had I think the device I was using before this one, it was in fact a Lenovo X1 Carbon that I liked a great deal, and I forget what they were advertising, the battery life was, but I was getting 8 to 10 hours on a charge from it. And I mean, that is a life-changing experience for somebody who spends time on the road, where you can fly coast to coast. You don't have to worry. You don't have to dim the monitor. You don't have to worry if you're going to run out of power. You can go to a conference in the morning and you can be productive on that device all day long. You're not worrying, well, where am I going to plug this in? So yeah, anything north of 8 to 10 hours is phenomenal from my standpoint.
Huge, yeah, huge.
I remember when battery conversations were revolving around just making sure you put in a monthly reminder in your calendar to let your battery drain completely, because otherwise you'd kill the life of the battery by basically having your laptop plugged in all the time. But what's interesting is the battery technology has come so far in the last few years, even where there's like all this AI now being used to manage the consumption of the energy on the devices. Even you see this now with Apple iPhones and with that type of device, where even if you plug it in, it may not necessarily charge if you have enough battery and the device doesn't think you need the charge. So that helps keep obviously battery life better over time, which is going to improve the ratio of usability to battery life. So very interesting developments on the battery technology side of things for sure.
Yeah, and then these new notebooks too, a lot of that's attributed to the 10th gen core processor stuff. Intel did, even though the performance is obviously still better than it was, but that was not a gigantic leap in performance from the last gen to this one. But they did a lot of optimizations under the hood to make that thing super efficient, to really stretch out battery life on these. So very cool stuff. A lot of else in here, Rich, isn't stuff that we need to talk about too much. It's a lot of upgrades. It's a lot of typical evolution of of product lines. I will point out, for those who like workstation notebooks, the 5750 is also a very interesting product in the fact that it's the only one, and of course I'm going to get an email that's like, well, Matt, did you know that the MSI blah blah, okay, there might be another one out there, but as far as I've seen, this is the first 17-inch notebook that I've seen that goes under 5 pounds, which is a pretty big development for those who want a larger workstation, a large screen workstation, but still have it be somewhat portable. And of course, it's not as powerful as like the 7000, and those are definitely going to be heavier. But a Quadro RTX 3000, 17-inch display, and I don't know, I didn't say if that one was Xeon or not, but I think you can get the 10th gen core or Xeon.
I think
but under 5 pounds is pretty impressive.
But what about the ports? I want to know about the ports. I'm making a joke simply because even 2 years ago, IT guys or gals were obsessed about the connectivity on devices. And in this short, 2-year period, even, I've seen people feel like, you know what? USB port that does multifunction things and Wi-Fi, and I'm good. So there's definitely been a shift in the connectivity side of things. And this is interesting because oftentimes you need to be able to differentiate between the power users that are going to be connecting to external hard drives and things and other type of workflows for video and editing and whatnot, versus your power business users who really just need, the triangle of priorities, right? Battery, Wi-Fi, and everything else on top. So.
Yeah, connectivity is still a big deal to some, although I think Thunderbolt has done a lot to convince people that they can have this little tiny hub, that they need all that connectivity that you can plug in, and they're usually less than $50, and it gives you Ethernet, and it gives you more ports, and it gives you HDMI out, it gives you all that stuff that in order to slim down the notebook. And I'm Luis, believe me, I'm like, I want as much connectivity as possible. But even these days, I've switched to more Thunderbolt based, adding that connectivity only when I need it.
Yeah.
So important stuff. So cool. Well, a lot of good stuff. There's a whole bunch of other things here in this release we didn't really get to. Some new all-in-ones that they released, and then some other precision notebooks that are in here as well. So go and find this in the article on the show notes page and give it a read, and then go and check out those maybe on the Dell website for more. Rich, we're gonna switch gears, and we're gonna talk about ransomware. I guess this is a new national holiday, anti-ransomware day. Now, I didn't get you a card, Rich. And
I
feel
was going
really
to say,
bad.
happy belated anti-ransomware day. I didn't get you a card either.
Now, do we give each other gifts on this day? Like, how does this work?
And are they good gifts? Are they bad? Yeah, that's a good
We
question.
can't go out to a restaurant.
Does the
to
card have a
celebrate.
bleeding heart? Yeah.
Rich, we can't even go out to a restaurant to celebrate. It's
I
very
know.
sad.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and you know what? You said national holiday. This is actually an international holiday. So anti-ransomware day was something that was essentially cooked up by Kaspersky and Interpol. So Interpol is the big international agency that helps national law enforcement agencies share information and coordinate activities and so on and so on. I mean, obviously, they are very involved in cybercrime, and so they along with Kaspersky came up with this concept of anti-ransomware day. It was actually last Tuesday.
We need to get party hats and balloons, like the lady on the screen.
Yeah, right in the picture there.
For those who are listening, there's the image associated with this article here on the first page. There's a very somber looking young woman with curly hair and a red party hat holding a red balloon who does not look very excited.
Yeah.
I just couldn't believe it's been 3 years. Honestly, when I read the article, I was just 3 years have passed and we've been dealing with this nonsense this long already. Yeah, it's crazy.
And what Luis was referring to there is that they picked this date. So it was Tuesday, May 12th, anti-ransomware day, and they picked that date specifically because it was the 3-year anniversary of WannaCry and that enormous ransomware mess. So that for here on out, I guess May 12th is now WannaCry Day, anti-ransomware day. But I pulled together, partly in honor of that day. Kaspersky had some interesting statistics. It just so happened, I believe this was a coincidence, Sophos came out with some research last week as well that had to do with ransomware. So I pulled some data together from a number of different sources that happened to show up on my desk last week, just to kind of quantify ransomware a little bit. So Sophos went out to 5,000 global IT managers. So 5,000 people, companies of all sizes. 51% of them said their organization had been hit by ransomware in the last year. 51%. And in case you're thinking, well, maybe that's mostly the bigger businesses, 47% of the people who responded from companies with 100 to 1,000 employees, so 47% of the SMBs within the last year have been hit by ransomware, which is kind of amazing to me. Kaspersky went out and they tried to put it in more sort of individual terms. And they said they were aware of 767,907 individual users who were attacked by encryptors, by ransomware in 2019. So kind of a massive, absolutely massive problem. And then you go back to the Sophos research, 3/4 of the ransomware attacks on their radar in 2019 actually succeeded in encrypting data. Now, 94% of the organizations that had encrypted data were able to get the data back. In 51% of the cases, that's because they had the data backed up and they were able to restore from a backup. In 26% of cases, they got the data back because they paid the ransom. And, honor among thieves, the people who paid the ransoms, 95% of the time, they did, in fact, get the data back after they paid up.
Well, at least they're honest, and they're honest criminals. At least
there you go. You know what? Kudos to the criminals for at least doing what they said they were going to do. But this is, for the companies that get hit by this is no laughing matter, because Sophos actually went out to quantify what's the financial impact from a ransomware attack, and this is remediation. It's the impact to your reputation, so on and so forth. But they said if you did not pay the ransom, total cost averaged $732,520. If you did pay the ransom, total cost averaged $1,448,000 and change, like roughly twice what you wound up paying if you declined to pay the ransom. But either way, really, really expensive.
Yeah, that kind of cost really can obliterate a small business, obviously. And I think what's interesting is definitely there's more talk of how small businesses are in fact the target, simply because the criminals are casting these very wide nets. They're not excluding anybody for the sake of trying to find the bigger fish. And so whoever they find, if they can trick a small business owner, accounting person, into sending a $100,000 payment somewhere, they will. Um, but the ransomware bit, I think, has really elevated the need for the layered approach to security. And this is the kind of thing, the conversation has been going on the IT side of things for so long. You know, it's not enough to just deploy an antivirus. You kind of have to move into the next generation stuff that is doing AI and machine learning based scanning of threats and can adapt very quickly to a changing threat that is deployed to a device. But not only that, you also have to protect the DNS layer and make sure you're scanning the links that people are clicking on. And then there's the email scanning. So there's all these different pieces play a role in helping secure these networks. And then now add to the fact that most of these people went home and are outside of their corporate networks where some of these security or initiatives were actually placed. And so it places a bigger burden on making sure that the users are more knowledgeable and trained properly, and that their machines have those layers built in as well. So definitely an ongoing effort to make sure that people are staying safe and staying protected. And a lot of times the small businesses just don't know where to start. And so this is sort of the big challenge for MSPs or IT providers to get the word out there to let them know how to help.
And, you know, and challenge and opportunity, right? And it's like the last little bit of information or bucket of information in the story was about some data that came out last week about the, you know, the percentage of MSPs out there who are offering or will be offering cybersecurity services. So, I mean, this is something that is a huge problem for SMBs and businesses of every size, but it's also, for that very reason, an opportunity for channel pros. And like you were saying, Luis, especially now, when people are connecting with corporate resources from, you know, home PCs in some cases, poorly secured home networks and so on. I mean, this is something that customers legitimately need, but it's also potentially a new revenue source for MSPs and other channel pros out there. I mean, has there been any change at Ook in terms of what you offer from a security standpoint?
Yeah, in our case, we just with the help of our primary security vendor, which is Sophos at the moment, they offered home user licenses at no additional cost to their MSPs. And so we could go and say, hey, everybody in this company, if you're going to be working from your personal devices, just go ahead and install this on your device. And in many cases, it got rid of little things that would have been potentially a concern if they were doing a VPN connection back to the corporate network to get files or anything like that. So I think the vendors actually stepped up in a big way to help ensure that sort of the extension of that network into home devices and personal devices were as protected as reasonably possible. But you can't discount the amount of effort that's involved on the part of the MSP to actually get that done, especially on devices that they don't currently manage. They don't have an RMM agent on these devices, so you kind of rely on the end user to actually do the deployment. And so in the midst of already trying to get most people working remotely, to have to spend that kind of time with each of those individual end users was definitely a tall order. In our case, we found a lot of our clients just sent people home with their work computers. And so if they needed to be on the VPN, then they were already secured by what was on the device as far as endpoint security is concerned. And then, of course, by being on the network over VPN, they were protected at the network level with things like Cisco Umbrella or the other tools that we use. And so definitely a tall order. And we're starting to see now, at least in our area in BC, they've started to relax a little bit of the quarantine stuff related to COVID, and we're starting to see people return to work. And so we hope that this has sort of reached that inflection point of going back to some sense of normalcy, but we'll have to wait and see what happens.
And I think there's the widespread expectation that even when restrictions have been completely lifted, this experience people have had of working from home and realizing that it actually works a little bit better than maybe they thought it would. You know, that there could be a permanent change in the way people work now, where they spend some of the week at the office and some of the week at home. So some of these security issues will probably be ongoing ones.
Yeah, in fact, I saw a Twitter thread by Toby Lutke of Shopify this morning, where he has basically announced that Shopify, which is a multi-billion-dollar company, the second largest company on the Canadian Stock Exchange after Royal Bank, have announced they are now digital by default and that they will be remote for the rest of the year. They will be focusing on decentralizing the need for offices and things like that. So it definitely, especially when vendors of that size are leading the charge in sort of this innovation piece of adopting change and being ready for change, it gets others thinking about it in more transcendental ways for sure.
Interesting. Hey, Rich, I want to pose a question to the two of you. It's one that I found interesting. I narrowed in on a line here on ransomware fact number 2, and that's that Sophos says rectifying an attack whose victim paid the ransom essentially cost double what it did if they didn't pay the ransom, which gives hope that it's worth finding ways to remediate and not do that. What happens if those numbers ever get reversed, where it's cheaper to pay the ransom than it is to try and rectify it without paying the ransom?
Well, I mean, you almost think, in a sense, there are people making decisions based on that assumption now. You will hear sometimes about ransomware attacks that hit a hospital, for example, and all the medical data suddenly is inaccessible to them, and they've got to get it back right away. They've got patients, and there have been incidents like this, and it's whatever it is we got to pay. I mean, it feels cheaper than the alternative. So in short, I would think if the conventional wisdom ever gets to the point that it's cheaper to pay, you're going to see a lot of people pay, especially if 95% of the time you do in fact get your data back.
Do you think we would see a gigantic uptick in the amount of ransomware attacks if paying became the new norm? Luis, what do you think?
I don't know. I think they cast a pretty wide net already. I think also there's a lot of emotion, I think, that goes into some of these decisions as well, that it's hard to specifically measure. Some business owners are going to be like, screw the bad people. We're just going to we would never pay, period. It doesn't matter what sort of fallout they have in the business as a result, just as a matter of principle, they may not do it. So I think there's all these factors that play a role in this kind of thing as well. But yeah, I'm not sure that would necessarily change. I think if anything, raising the awareness of it is going to help people focus more on how are they backing up their data, on having a proper IT strategy plan. I think those are the things that matter rather than figuring out how to deal with the consequences. And so, yeah, early planning and early addressing the risks, I think, is the best solution. And more attention on that is welcome, obviously, from the IT consulting and managed service community than anything else. Because we don't want to deal with any kind of ransomware attack. It literally takes all the resources, sucks the life out of the MSP for however long it takes to address that. So what's interesting, actually, if you think about it, is a lot of cyber insurance liability clauses or policies are now requiring MSPs to provide details of like how they're managing customer computers, and there's a much higher threshold of getting approved to receive cyber insurance liability. And so I think as businesses themselves are trying to get insurance for their operations and stuff like that, they're going to see that there's these requirements going up and up and up and up, and it's going to force them to think about the strategy and the planning a little bit more thoroughly than they have been. I think still we have a big contingent of businesses that are just, YOLOing this whole situation and not really focusing on addressing the risk initially. So I'm hoping it's an agent for change, obviously, but it involves all of us being very, very cognizant of having to talk about it all the time.
And I will drop a little preview here of stuff that's coming up on the ChannelPro Weekly podcast, because there was actually an article in the Wall Street Journal this week about the escalating requirements that cyber insurance companies now are beginning to roll out, in part because people are working from home and the risks have gone up. But I mean, also I think just experience over time has taught cyber insurers what the risks really look like from an actuarial kind of standpoint. So the requirements are going up. In I don't know if it's 2 weeks or 3 weeks, but stay tuned every week, folks, because in a few episodes we're actually going to have the CEO of a cyber insurance company on the podcast to talk about this issue.
Awesome.
And just where that industry is trending and what it's going to wind up meaning for the end users who buy policies and the MSPs who sell them.
Yeah. And that episode is going to be a do not miss. It's going to be very, very, very interesting and very, very worthwhile for you to tune into that. Rich, that's going to wrap up the news that we have, but we do have another story, one that we cover every year when we do it, one that everybody looks forward to, particularly me, because this is where we get to learn a lot about newer companies that we may not have heard before. And that is our, drum roll please, our 2020 ChannelPro Vendors on the Vanguard article. Rich, tell us about this year's list.
Well, first, for folks who are new to the Vendors on the Vanguard list, I'll just explain what that is. And because this is one of my favorite things to do every year, is once a year, we put together a list of vendors who are maybe underappreciated, unknown, up and coming, brand new. It's just a list of companies who we at ChannelPro think are interesting for one reason or another, and suspect that a lot of people in our audience are unfamiliar with. And so now I'm trying to remember if we had 17 names or 18 names on the list this year. It varies.
And there's always that one guy who sends an email is like, I already heard of that, and then we have to fine,
So, some of these products have been around for a while, and it's like they're new to us. But yeah, there are people out there who have been using them for 6 years and so on. But there are definitely some products on the list this year that just didn't exist 6 months or 12 months ago. And so I'll start with one of those, actually. It's a product and a company called Sas Alerts, as in software as a service alerts. And this was actually founded by some folks affiliated once upon a time with a company some people may remember called Independence IT. And they were into workspace as a service and so on. Some of the people at that company have created this new business called Sas Alerts, which just really opened its doors within the last month or two. And what it essentially does, it's a security tool that kind of looks across all of the different software as a service solutions that an end user uses and correlates security information and looks for threats that might be invisible if you're just focused on Salesforce, but that suddenly become apparent if you're looking at Salesforce and Office 365. So right now, they can continuously monitor Office 365, Salesforce, G Suite, Dropbox, Box, and Slack. They're going to be adding more of those tools. But it's a pretty kind of affordable, set it and forget it kind of solution that's just going to keep an eye on all these different cloud services for you and look for stuff that's happening in any one of them, but especially across multiple solutions that might be an indicator of a problem. And looking at the pricing here, it starts at 45 cents per user per month on a 1-year contract with a $100 minimum. So not an expensive addition to the arsenal.
I'll comment on your comment, Rich, of not being expensive addition to the arsenal, and I think my comment is just sort of the challenge that there is for vendors that are trying to get into the MSP channel specifically, of making sure that their product is not overpriced for what the typical MSP engagement model is, which is we don't like to go and deploy the one thing for the one customer. We typically want to blanket our entire fleet of devices and users and customers with the same solution to truly get the benefit out of it. Now, for those of us who do all-in seat pricing, where we charge a specific fee per month per user to do everything that's involved in supporting that customer, including all our tools in that stack, it's so troublesome when you look at one solution potentially that addresses one small bit, like the alerts, but then there's another one that addresses doing some of the and offboarding, and then another one. By the time you've added all of these, you have 45 cents plus 70 cents plus 15 cents, and now you've added $3, $4, $5 to your per seat cost. and that can obviously scale very quickly. So I'm seeing a trend of more and more per user type services coming on the market. And I would just, if any vendor is listening, I would beg you to look at how this impacts the approach of MSPs in a fleet-wide type of deployment. And to consider that most MSPs are a sell-through partner of them, and that they should help offer the incentives and the pricing advantages that's going to help the MSP deploy more, as opposed to being a end customer that just deploys the occasional 20 seats. But I've sort of stole away the thunder of like talking about Sas Alerts. They're probably not happy if they're listening, but I looked at their product and I thought it was fascinating. I thought I'd love to have this kind of visibility across my fleet, but we support over 1,000 end users, and to take on a $450 US plus 40% exchange rate to the Canadian dollar does not seem like something we would do, and we don't want to piecemeal the deployment. So that's an interesting observation. I think that most SaaS vendors that are trying to address the MSP market are missing in some cases.
And there's a related issue to that as well that I talk with MSPs about, which is this whole question of, okay, I've discovered this product I think is great and that my customers would benefit from, and it's 45 cents per user per month. So I'm going to add that into my bundles now. And then the question becomes, do I raise the price of those bundles? So I mean, that in a way, that's the issue there. If you see this cool solution that's going to be $4,500 a month from you for you, and you're not, raising price, can't raise prices to accommodate that, then yeah, it's just coming. You're adding interesting functionality, but it's coming straight off the bottom line.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously MSPs should be and are raising their prices on a regular basis, maybe yearly, as contracts are typically 1 year or so. And so, yes, you can do some price adjustments at those points, but when you take on a product like this midstream, you are eating the cost for the rest of that contract. And if it's, you hopefully have staggered contracts with most of your clients that you're addressing. But I see very few MSPs do price raises that are staggered as well. They just typically do a yearly price increase across the board with all their customers based on potentially their fiscal year end or something like that. And so, yeah, definitely an interesting trend. But I see some great products popping up and worthwhile having a look at.
Well, let's take a peek at another item on the list this year. And the company behind this one is called Consortium, Concertium. But the product that kind of got them on the list is the system called Captain's Chair IT, which came out last year. I want to say late last year. I know that's when I first started hearing about it. And the idea basically is it's sort of like a dashboard product for the end user. And there are portals, obviously, that a lot of the RMM and PSA vendors have. But this is a more robust version of that, where through a single pane of glass, your customer, your end user, can take a look at all the hardware and software that is under management, ticket status, device status, application performance status, website analytics, a whole bunch of stuff. And the model, basically, the idea was, if you are an MSP who is working with a larger, like a mid-sized grade of business, a business large enough to have an IT department, here's something that on a self-serve basis is going to allow that external IT department to understand what you're doing, what's going on, and not have to contact you as much maybe to get information about things. On its own, and it came out last year, and on its own, it was an interesting product. Already last year and increasingly in the last, for me, 6 to 9 months, I've been hearing a lot more talk about the whole co-managed IT phenomenon, where you as an MSP are co-managing in one way or to one degree or another your customer's IT, and the customer is big enough to have its own IT department. There's this other sort of, so if you are in that co-managed model, this is a perfect fit for you. And then there's this other phenomenon that is much more recent, and just in conversations I've had with CEOs in the industry, who vendors who work with MSPs, they are telling me that their MSP partners are landing much bigger accounts than was the case before the coronavirus. That the experiences that larger businesses have gone through in the last few months has told them that they want some more help, some outside help with a lot of this, the kind of rote infrastructure maintenance kinds of functions. They don't want to have to do that necessarily all in-house. And so you're seeing MSPs kind of move up market into larger companies. And if that is a trend with legs, and I've spoken to a number of people in the last few weeks who think it will persist, this Captain's Chair IT product, may have arrived at an opportune time, because it's a good fit for that kind of customer scenario too.
Yeah, the co-managed IT thing is something that we started looking into a little bit more in earnest late last year. And it's still, let's just call it foreign to our engagement model a bit, because it does require relinquishing a bit of the strategy component of the relationship, because the company does a lot of the strategy internally. It is typically a slightly larger company that has some kind of CIO function or a technology function driving a little bit of that. But it does become very important to have that ability to share the data between the two places. And I have seen Captain's Chair at a few of the vendor conferences where they've sponsored and been there on the show floor kind of thing, and it looked like a very interesting product. So definitely I see a lot of people moving to the co-managed IT bit, and we're offering it. We haven't really had a ton of bites on it because we still primarily market to the 20 to 50 seat customer, where we would manage pretty much the entirety of their IT. But I'm fascinated by this whole thing for sure.
Yeah, no, I mean, me too, and I'm definitely going to be keeping an eye on that whole phenomenon for a while here, because there are lots of different models for how people define it and deliver it, and anytime I talk to someone who's doing it, that they have run into some issues, and they're kind of working through whether those issues can be resolved. We had Vince Tinarello, an MSP from Denver, on the show just a few episodes back, and he played around with it a little bit. Not a big fan. So, but there are other folks who've been, on the cover of our magazine who have had tremendous results with it. So it's definitely an evolving field.
This list actually that you made for the ChannelPro article reminds me a bit of when I've been to a vendor conference of some kind and there's all these sponsors on the show floor. I actually have a little note in my notes app on the phone where I keep track of all the vendors that I see that I thought were interesting. And I don't necessarily want to go in and get pitched in that moment, but I want to look them up and get some information on them. And this list kind of reminded me of that, of having gone through a show floor and finding all these interesting things to have a peek at. Vince is great. I know Vince from obviously a lot of vendor conferences, and I think he's a big Datto partner. And we've been around some of the same shows for quite a while. And I know him to be very thorough in looking at these things. And my comment is simply that it's interesting how the shiny object syndrome of IT, small IT, is a real thing. It's a real problem because, the CEO sees a new dashboardy type of tool, looks great. Well, let's try this, but this introduces a ton of friction at the operational level of the MSP to execute or to be switching these things all the time. And so, again, message to the vendors: make sure your value prop is super clear, that your path to deployment and getting this in the operations of an MSP is super clear and outlined, and that's going to help for people to look at it and see how they envision their business 6 months down the line using this tool, kind of thing.
Yeah, let's, in the interest of time, let's pick one more to talk about. Luis, I know you scanned the list of the 2020 vendors on the Vanguard. Why don't we pick one that you want us to talk about real quick?
Tough call, but let me just have a quick gander at all the items.
Maybe one that stood out to you as, ooh, that looks interesting.
Yeah, Accordo is interesting as well, and maybe just a topic in particular, but I think the centralized multi-tenant management of things like Microsoft 365 or Office 365 is becoming all of a sudden very important, because even though Microsoft has introduced ways for partners to easily switch between different tenants and manage things about the different tenants easily, there's still the concern of how much access you give to tier 1 or tier 2 level technicians in your business and what they're able to do with that. And so, and it's onerous to manage that level of access across that many number of people. So a lot of these management tools that are coming out, another one that we were looking at, not on this list, but perhaps should be on the list, Rich, sorry to make you change your article, is one called Nuvolex. And Nuvolex does a similar sort of centralized multi-tenant Office 365 management. That one of the things that was interesting, I feel, is that it lets you connect all your tenants and then lets you run a PowerShell script, for example, across all your Microsoft 365 tenants. Because the hidden secret or the dirty secret is that there are so many things you can do in Microsoft 365 that is not available in a GUI. And so you have to manage some of these things via PowerShell. And so I find that the focus on automation is a big key. And I know Len, obviously, who's driving a lot of the channel strategy for Accordo. He used to be at Autotask, and people have known him from being in the channel for so many years. And Accordo is fascinating to me because they're pricing it slightly different. It's a flat fee. It's not a per user thing that's going to potentially grow out of control necessarily in your early stages. Obviously, as you grow and you have a little bit more room to play with some of these costs, then it makes sense. But the dashboarding of the security piece, especially in a co-managed IT scenario where the customer wants to understand how they're making improvements in their security posture over time, that kind of dashboard is so important to be able to show a customer the improvement or to create the justification for a cybersecurity project or an initiative to address some of the security problems. So I love the idea of what Accordo is doing, and we've been looking at the product closely on our end.
Very, very cool. All right. Well, we're gonna move on. If you want to see the rest of the list of the vendors on the Vanguard, go to channelpronetwork.com, where I know we got that story posted, and you'll be able to go through and look through all the different ones on the list this year. And hey, if you have a suggestion for one next year, I'm sure Rich wants to hear about it. Rich, how do they reach out about that?
You have to remind me, what's our email address here on the podcast? I would absolutely love to get, and thank you for Nuvolex, Luis. I will absolutely check that out. But yeah, if folks have a product they think their peers don't know about, tell us about it.
Yeah, podcast@channelpronetwork.com is the email address. Please make good use of that. We've talked a little bit about ransomware and security, and we're going to talk about a paper that was recently published called Big Security in a Small Business World. We have Wolfgang Goerlich, the advisory CISO of Cisco, who wrote that paper, is going to join us here in an interview we recorded yesterday. So stick around for that, and we'll be back with Luis Giraldo on the other side of that. So stick around. We'll be right back. Hello and welcome back to part 2 here of Channel Pro Weekly. We've got a great guest interview lined up for you today. Cisco publishes a wealth of security and threat intelligence information for security professionals. Their most recent report is titled Big Security in a Small Business World, 10 Mythbusters for SMB Cybersecurity. Now here to talk about that is Cisco Advisory CISO Wolfgang Goerlich. Welcome, Wolfgang.
Hey, good to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Great to have you here. So for those who may not be familiar with you, tell us a little bit about you.
Yeah, sure. So my background is in healthcare and financial services, where I led IT and IT security at a money management firm and a hospital, respectively. And also spent many years before joining Cisco recently doing consulting. So a lot of the types of customers that you guys feature here in the podcast and that, of course, we're including in the survey are the types of folks that I've worked with for years and years, helping build their security programs.
Awesome. Now your kind of title there is Advisory CISO, and I love acronyms just as much as the next person. But for those who have no idea what that is, can you tell us what an Advisory CISO is and what they do?
Sure, absolutely. So a CISO is a Chief Information Security Officer. So that is my role, right? Understanding how CISOs think, how we get things done, how we build programs. And of course, in the Cisco world, no longer doing that so much hands-on, but more in an advisory capacity.
Awesome. Rich, you have any questions for our guest here?
Yeah, well, I really do. I mean, and the reason I reached out and checked to see if you were going to be available to join us on the podcast was I came across this study a few weeks ago about security in the SMB world, and there were some numbers in there that were just really interesting to me. So I'd love to dive into that with you. So one of the things that sort of jumped out at me, you in the report identify 10 myths about SMB security, and a lot of them stem from the same issue, which is basically an assumption that big businesses and small businesses are very different when it comes to security. So just a few, I'll cite a few examples of that. 87% of the executives that you surveyed in SMBs agree that security is a high priority versus 84%, or excuse me, 84% make security awareness training mandatory. Big numbers in large businesses, but obviously very big numbers in SMBs too. 56% of SMBs patch daily or weekly, compared to 58% of large businesses, negligible difference there. From an incident response planning standpoint, this really surprised me. Only 1% of the SMBs you surveyed never test an incident response plan. 4% rarely test. And then it kind of goes up a little bit from there. But there's actually, I mean, it was encouraging to know that there are that many incident response plans out there, but they're actually being tested as well. So, I mean, to what extent were you surprised by the degree to which SMBs and enterprises have very similar security statistics?
Yeah, I was very surprised. I think, like many of us, we've got some preconceived notions, maybe some dated notions. And a lot of mine came from, I remember just trying to, in mid-sized companies, get executive buy-in for the simplest of security controls and running into pushback. So I had that in my mind. I remember working with small companies and meeting the CEO, and the CEO going, you know what? We're too small to be a target. They want to attack the big box stores. They don't want to attack, small medical company. And so I had that in the back of my mind. So I think a lot has changed in the past decade, right? A lot is changed as we've had more breaches, as the concerns have become a boardroom and an executive level topic. And frankly, as buy-in has led to some really good improvements in how security teams are functioning at these size organizations.
So obviously, just in the last few months, all of a sudden, millions and millions of workers have had to do their work from home. A lot of security concerns around that whole work from home phenomenon. Do you expect the experiences small businesses, mid-sized businesses have had in the last few months to change any of the patterns that you've seen up to now?
I do. And what a big shift, right? So United States numbers, this is for all employees, 16% of Americans were working from home before March. And by the end of March, that number had jumped to 78%. And now, of course, those states are opening back up. That number is trending back in the other direction as people are returning to the office. But who could have predicted that half our company would move from in the office to at home in such a short period of time? So certainly that's presented some issues. One is organizations that were, remote ready, or in some cases remote first. Hey, no problem. We're ready for this. We know what to do. In other cases, organizations that were remote hesitant, or even remote, like absolutely not, had to either file their disaster recovery plans, which we can have some good conversation about that, or go through some heroics. And frankly, I think in the heroic side, it really is a testament to, the can-do attitude of a lot of IT workers. We forget just how much can get done in a short period of time when it has to. But will it shift things? Absolutely. I mean, when you do that much, that fast, there's going to be some corners cut, unfortunately. There's going to be some cleanup afterwards, always. And there's going to be some adapting to the new risk profile. What happens when your data is 5 foot away from, your kids, right? It's a new world.
Now, I'll point out the definition of SMB for the purposes of this report. The SMBs you surveyed for this report, they were all between 250 and 499 employees. So not the smallest of small businesses, obviously. Would you expect, have you seen in the past any evidence that suggests when you get to the S part of the SMB spectrum, any of the patterns or trends you saw gets a little different?
I certainly would expect so, right? There's going to be less resources, less people. One of the things that was in this study was that, around 20 individuals in any given organization are thinking about security, acting on security, taking, actions to secure the organization. Obviously, when your company is now 20 people in size, that's not going to be possible. So there is going to be a scaling concern on the lower end for sure.
Now, after you work your way through those myths about SMB security, you talk about some issues out there as well, some of which were really intriguing to me. And there was one in particular that you said is a big issue at SMBs, at big businesses. It was something you called security fatigue. So define that term a little bit, and then explain to folks, what danger security fatigue potentially poses.
Yes. So there's a couple of different components to that, right? One is on the executive level, awareness. We have understanding of cybersecurity and privacy concerns. There's going to come a point where the executive is going to be like, great, we've invested in this. Why do you keep coming back to me with problems? So we run the risk of fatiguing at the executive level. Within the security level, we've got two different components. One is the just sheer number of things to do. So one of the measures is alerts per day. You oftentimes hear talked about, which is how many activities our security tools are asking for us to take care of. And there's only so many that people can, of course, take care of. And then another component to that is the tools themselves. So we had some very intriguing data about the ramifications of too many tools, right? As we've got the buy-in, we've got the resources, we've charged forward to secure these environments. In many cases, we've added such a extensive control landscape that it's really taxing and fatiguing and burning out the people who have to run these tools.
Yeah, well, that actually ties into something else you talk about in the report that I thought was interesting, which is a concept you called vendor sprawl. The idea that even SMBs in some cases have dozens of different security vendors, and you guys found a statistical correlation between more vendors and weaker security. So, I mean, talk a little bit about that phenomenon and what you would recommend SMBs do about it.
Certainly. So the vendor sprawl, a little bit counterintuitive, because you would think more resources, more tools, better security. But there's definitely a tipping point where that becomes a detriment. And, in thinking about it, it made sense. There was a time where my organization was at the financial services firm. We had an outage, and I sent my team, I'm like, go forth and figure out what's going on. And, a half hour, we all regather in the war room. And the storage guy's like, all right, I figured out what it is. It's I/O on this backplane. And the server guy's like, no, it's a CPU problem. And the network guy's, oh, I figured it out. It's on our edge if we just reboot our edge. And it took several hours just to get us on the same page as to what was going on before we could even handle it. In much the same way, we're seeing statistical evidence that at a certain point in time, when you've got 10 or more tools, the efficacy starts to go down and the amount of downtime an organization faces goes up. So if you've got a small set of tools, organizations tend to get back up from security incidents in 4 hours or less. On the other side, it's 16 hours or more with a significant amount of vendors and vendor sprawl. So obviously that leads to, much like cyber fatigue, a conversation of, are we doing the right things? Are we doing them well, right? Things that are straightforward to implement, don't have a lot of impact on us to manage, have great stopping power. Things like good MFA, things like good DNS security, things like strong hardening policies for our devices. Those types of things that are in a direct line with where the adversary is going, without thinking about all the different possibilities that could perhaps happen, and having vendor point solutions for each one.
Yeah, but you touch on this is a tricky issue for reasons that you kind of alluded to there, which is that the experts are continually telling people you need a layered security strategy. You've got to have multiple layers to protect an end user. And then you get into that territory of how many layers is too many, how many is not enough. I mean, how do you think your way through that?
Yeah, the security term is defense in depth. A good friend of mine coined the term expense in depth, which is we just think of all the different possibilities. We just keep adding on layers and hoping. One of the things that I've oftentimes thought about was, if you take the typical tactics a criminal is doing, perhaps the top 10. And we had some interesting data in this report about what those top 10 are across various industries. But if you take the top 10 and you perform an analysis of what path they're going to take in our environment, and you layer on controls across that path, you're in a good spot. If you try and imagine all the different things that could happen, that's where we end up with getting vendor sprawl.
Rich, for just to sum up here, the correct number of layers is 42.
For those taking notes.
That is the answer right there. Yes.
42. I got a question for you. So there's a lot of different myths here that you've kind of uncovered, and lots of different statistics and things that you fielded. What in your opinion came out as surprising or interesting that you maybe didn't expect?
Well, that would be the threat hunting myth. So threat hunting has long been seen as an advanced capability, right? You've got some really smart wonks in a room who are looking at the bits and bytes. You've got the matrix screen happening. I'm hoping in my fantasy, I'm wearing Neo glasses, and I can see all the bad guys and know exactly what they're doing, and I hunt them throughout my environment. It's seen as being a more advanced activity. What I think is fascinating is this movement towards democratization of security, which is putting reasonable tools in people's hands, giving people the right information, lowering the bar to get the data and insights to act on it. And so previously we thought no one would do threat intel in the SMBs, and then they came back and said, oh yeah, we do it all the time, right? We're consuming Cisco Talos information. We've got tools that load up the indicators of compromise for us. We've got people who sit and think, all right, how could they be moving through our environment? Do we have the right layers? And that really surprised me. It was great to see.
That was actually very surprising to me as well. Very interesting data point. I want to go back to something you touched on very briefly early on in the conversation here, which is the topic of business continuity. Because business is big, business is small, everybody has gotten a real lesson in the value of business continuity planning. And knowing what you're going to do, say, if the governor declares you can't go to the office tomorrow, or there's an earthquake or a tornado. And I actually see business continuity planning as an opportunity for our readers at ChannelPro as we come out of the worst of the COVID crisis and the worst of the recession. I think that's something that managed service providers in particular are well positioned to do. I mean, to what extent, where do you see the need for and the opportunity in business continuity planning for SMBs?
Yes, and I think that's a great to turn this moment into an opportunity to bolster our business continuity plans. You think about everything that's downstream from security, right? Hey, what are my critical assets? What if something got hacked? What would it mean to the business? What are the business functions? All that type of information is continued in a business continuity plan. It's gathered during that exercise. So I think the opportunity to use a good BCP DRP to drive a security program forward is very real, and something that, you're right, a lot of your readers should jump on. In terms of good plans, one of the things that I did when Michigan went into lockdown in mid-March is I reached out to a few of my peers. I reached out to a few of my customers because I used to do business continuity consulting. I'm like, hey, you remember that plan I wrote? Did it work? Or is everyone just sort of wondering what to do? And I was looking for some trends, and the trend lines were pretty clear. People who had very specific plans and people who tested those plans at least every 6 months. Those were the people who, within their organization, were able to take charge and help champion the organization through this change. Organizations that had very high level plans, we believe in business continuity, we will continue, struggled. Those who had plans that include things like load the floppy disk, struggled, right? If it wasn't refreshed and in people's minds, it wasn't applicable. So I think there's a moment in time here where we can definitely jump on BCP DRP, leverage it for security. But remember, in doing so, we need to be very specific and test those plans regularly afterwards.
Now, was it a 3.5 or a 5.25 inch floppy disk?
True story. It was a 3.5 floppy, and it included instructions on how to load a network driver. This is something that still makes me wince to this day, that I found this in the plan.
Rich, any other follow-up questions?
No, back to you.
So I did have one. So towards the end of the report here, you kind of touch on a subject that we've been talking about on the show a lot recently, because this mad rush to get people able to work at home has caused a lot of questions around, well, how do you secure remote workers in their own homes, and what do you do? So you kind of touch on some basics here. I'd love for you to dive in a little bit with some of your advice on how to start making the remote workforce more secure.
Sure, absolutely. Fundamentally, it's about doing some of the basics that we've talked about for a long time, but in a new way. So how do we ensure the person is who they say they are? It's not someone who just picked up the laptop off the couch and is typing on it, right? How do we make sure that the bad guys aren't taking advantage of these new environments? So good multi-factor, of course, is a leading control. The next step is, how do we protect all these devices from getting infected and calling out? Good DNS security. It's one of the first things that we think of, because it doesn't require infrastructure. It doesn't require a lot of oversight back to fatigue. So good DNS security. So, obviously in the Cisco world, that would be Duo and Umbrella, but use your vendors wisely. In regards to protecting the devices, how do we make sure the devices are still patched and up to date? That would be a device health conversation or a MDM conversation. How do we make sure we've got good connectivity? That would be a VPN connection back to headquarters, or in some environments, some of the more forward-leaning SMBs, that would be a zero trust infrastructure, where you're basically connecting directly to the apps over the internet. So I think there's a lot of conversation that can be had around, is the person good? Is the device good? Is the connection good? And from there, we can rely on that work to get done wherever.
Very, very good. And of course, always, if you're still using 3.5 inch floppies, keep them in a locked container, because you never know what might happen. So it's a great report. Lots of great information, lots of interesting statistics. We highly recommend you go and you check it out. We're going to post a link to this from our show notes page, channelpronetwork.com. So go ahead and find the show notes page for this episode, and you will see that there. And I want to thank our guest, Wolfgang. Thanks for coming on and talking with us today. For those who want to maybe follow up with you or learn more about you or find you on social media, where can they find you?
Sure. I'm on Twitter at JW Goerlich. I do a semi-regular, couple times a week, video on YouTube, also at JW Goerlich. And my personal blog is jwgoerlich.com. It's probably pretty consistent at this point in time.
Sounds pretty consistent. So Wolfgang Goerlich, Cisco Advisory, CISO, thank you so much for being here and talking with us today. We're going to go and we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to wrap up the show with our regular end of the show features. We've got a museum pick for you, a tech pick, and Rich will peer into his crystal ball and tell us what might have been and what might be coming down the road. You won't want to miss that. Stick around. We'll be right back. And we are back with part 3 of ChannelPro Weekly, where we're going to wrap up the show with some end of the show regular features. We're also going to play the awesome and much loved 5 questions with Luis Giraldo. Rich, I want to say that was a really great interview with Wolfgang. Lots of interesting stuff. Anything in particular you want to comment about or mention?
No, but I would, again, just encourage folks to take a look at the report. A lot of what we talked about, I think, will be that much clearer when you look at the data that was inspiring some of that conversation. So we'll have a link to that in the show sheet.
Yeah, and if you love charts and graphs, get ready. You are just going to be all about this. Charts and graphs everywhere. It'll make your day, especially, and consider it a nice treat, a gift. A late gift for Ransomware Day. All right. We are going to play 5 questions with Luis Giraldo. For those who don't know 5 questions, Rich and I are going to come up on the top of our heads 5 random questions to ask Luis. Could be about anything and everything, and we will see how he responds. And in most cases, hilarity ensues.
Yeah, I think what will
Luis?
be interesting is giving a completely random answer to the question. We'll see.
Well, that's part of the fun. So Luis, are you ready?
Do I need to have Google, on hand here? Let's
No,
see.
no, this is usually about stuff that you like. We're not. This is not a
All right,
quiz.
all right.
So, Rich, you want to take the first question, or you want me?
You go first.
All right, first question. So, at the top of the show, Luis, you were talking about how you play keyboards and you play around the road with Shakira. So, my question is Shakira says that her hips don't lie. Is that true?
I think what happens is her hips makes liars of men. Um, Well, my vantage point during the tour was one that was maybe a desirable vantage point in the eyes of many. But she's a smart gal. I really enjoyed working with her at the time, and for a 22-year-old, which is how old I was at the time, getting the chance to tour the way we did and playing to stadiums and arenas of 15,000, 20,000 people was an experience like no other. So in that sense, I think. Yeah, hips don't lie. Yeah, I don't know what else to say.
Fantastic. Rich, question number 2 to you.
Well, I'm just a hop, skip, and a jump down the road from you right now, Luis. I'm in Seattle, which means that when the border reopens someday, I will be able to go to Vancouver again. So, yeah, and I know the kind of obvious stuff. What's the off the beaten path thing that I should do in Vancouver the next time that I'm there?
Oh, that's a great question, Rich, and especially because I consider myself to be a proud Vancouver host when people come to visit. There are a couple things that I always take people to do when they come through town. One of them is a drive through Stanley Park around 9 o'clock, so we can hear the 9 o'clock gun. So there's this interesting cannon that's in Stanley Park, and they fire a shell. Or a blank every night at 9 p.m. and it's quite a audible thing. So it's kind of neat to be right next to it as you're driving by at 9 p.m. And a wonderful, warm summer night when the light is still out and this gun goes off. It's just a wonderful sort of not typical thing to do, which is fun. Um, Also, the food scene in Vancouver is just top notch. I find that sometimes introducing people to some not typical restaurants here in Vancouver has been a fun way to get some new experiences. And one of my favorites is a place called Bao Bei. Bao Bei is a Chinese brasserie, and they have an interesting sort of mix of West Coast and Chinese and French cuisine. What's interesting about the Vancouver food scene, actually, sorry to go on a ramble here, but there's a popular restaurant here in Vancouver called Shambar Restaurant. Shambar is of Belgian style and origin. The owner is Belgian. The owner's wife is Canadian, but they together built this restaurant, and a lot of important chefs have come through Shambar and then started their own restaurants. And it's been sort of a launch point for some interesting sort of takes on cuisine of different kinds. And so there's Kisa Tanto, there's Bao Bei, there's Shambar, all great restaurants. So I think anybody coming to visit, if you came, we'd be spending 3, 4 days just going to new places to eat and have a good time every day. Hopefully, enough of these are open by the time you come
Yeah,
back around. So
true. But that's music to my ears. That sounds like a great trip from my standpoint. Just go restaurant hopping.
yeah.
Yeah, French Chinese, not a combination you normally think about. French Chinese, but that does sound very very good. I'm with you. If now is that gun that you were talking about that they set off in Stanley Park? Is that like a cannon?
Yeah, it's an actual cannon. It's surrounded by a cage. You can't get too close to it at the moment, but um, when you're in the downtown core, which I am, at 9 o'clock, you sort of hear the low rumble of the shot, and the closer you get, obviously, the more impactful it is. So what's kind of fun about it is sort of the waiting for that moment when it's going to go off right before 9 p.m. And if you're really close by it, it just creates this sort of expectation that's really fun to experience. And so a lot of good times. Obviously, the other thing about Vancouver is that it's sort of Squamish and the outdoor areas that are on the way to Whistler are absolutely beyond comparison. And so definitely a lot of outdoor activities here in the area for those who like to do a hike or who like to do outdoor sports and the like.
Yeah, very cool. For those who've never actually been around a cannon when it goes off, it's a pretty crazy experience. You don't realize how loud they are. I know there's a place near where I live called Galena, which is like the hometown of Ulysses S. Grant. And they do like a big Grant festival every year, and they bring out like cannons, and they fire off those blank loads, and it like you could feel it in your chest when they go off. It's really crazy. All right, question number 3 to Rich. Rich, I want to give you question number 3.
I get question number 3. Okay. So we'll just stick with the travel theme. How about that? So, you talked about being at conferences before. I know you did a lot of that, certainly when you were at IT Glue. What's your favorite city outside of Vancouver to go to?
Oh man, that's such a tough call. It would almost always have to be food related. And I would say that anytime I've had a tremendous culinary experience, that place seems to stick in my head. I'd say one of those places is Austin. Austin obviously has a barbecue scene like no other, but in addition to that, there's this awesome food scene. A good friend of mine, Joel Rennick, who works for a large software company called Jamf Software, the last time I was there, he took me to a couple different places that were just off the beaten path, great sort of up and coming restaurants with a very interesting menu, and I loved my food experience there. And of course, barbecue. The last conference that was held in Austin, I think I ate barbecue 3 or 4 days in a row, and had to not eat brisket for like 6 months. But so yeah, I always seem to remember Austin. It's been one of my most memorable meals for sure.
Very cool. All right. I will take question number 4. So earlier in the show, you said something along the lines of like you were glad that you were able to come up with your own voice for your company when you were writing, and you were doing your own voice. And that kind of stuck in my head. So I wanted to ask, if you had to give your company a voice, and it had to be the voice of a cartoon character, which cartoon character would it be?
Oh my gosh.
And why?
Man, this is exactly where the hilarity caution is going to ensue. Oh, it would have to be the Roadrunner. Uh, the Roadrunner is always escaping danger. And so, yeah, and the Roadrunner doesn't say anything, I guess. I don't remember him saying anything.
Let's see. I think
Um,
your vocabulary is limited to meet meet.
yeah. So wise choice on my part. I think as IT people, we need to say less and plan more. It's easy to get into these sort of talky tech conversations with clients, and we just need to sort of help them understand risk and let them do the thinking and the talking. Anyway, so that's my answer, and I'm sticking to it.
I like it. All right. Question number 5. Last question. Rich, you want to take it?
Well, I can go with something. Do you have something you would like to ask?
Not off the top of my head at the moment. So
Well, how about
if you've
that we
got
can
something
collaborate? Because I was thinking maybe something hockey related.
That's a good. Oh, that's all right. You are from Canada. You're from Vancouver. Doesn't look like Luis is a big hockey fan. He's shaking his head there a little bit.
Well, I mean, it's just as a matter of context, I grew up in South America where hockey is not a thing at all. And so I came to Vancouver in '97. And of course, you can't help but get a little bit swayed by the whole hockey thing, especially if you make a run at the playoffs like we did before the Stanley Cup riots here a few years ago. But
So has it sucked
yeah.
you in? Are you into hockey there?
You know, my wife is Swedish, and she's always watched hockey and is always sort of very interested in learning about the Swedish hockey players. And one of the interesting things that has happened is my wife, who in Sweden, there's a big candy culture. And so she owns a small candy shop here in the Yaletown district in Vancouver. And the Swedish players seem to always find their way to the candy shop somehow, and so we have interesting visits sometimes from the hockey players to the Swedish candy store, and even the visiting teams who many times have the Swedish hockey players on them will hear about the store and they'll come by. But obviously with the NHL season canceled, the several $100 orders that we get occasionally from the Swedish hockey players have dried up, unfortunately. But yeah, so that's my hockey story. We do go occasionally to watch the games, and it's always fun to be there. I find we've been watching The Last Dance over the last couple weeks, actually, and it has reinvigorated my love for basketball, funnily enough. And so I always find that hockey games just take so long.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah, I feel like, yeah, well, the pace is good, obviously, but but in compared to, for example, baseball, or I guess it's not as long. But yeah, I find that hockey games are, it's a 3 or 4 hour ordeal sometimes. So
Yeah, you never really know how long a hockey game is going to go because I mean, you could have a period start and it's just there's no calls, there's no penalties, there's no icing calls, and it just runs through. But yeah, sometimes it definitely can get a little long. Some people don't like the intermissions. It's like crazy action and then like break, and not everybody likes that either. So you're watching. I know we're already past the question number 5, but you're watching Living the Dreams. I'm from the Chicago area. I lived in Chicago when all that was going on with the Bulls. Did you follow basketball back in the day?
I did quite a bit. I played a little bit in high school, and when I was drafted into the Army in Colombia, which was mandatory service, I played for the battalion that I was in. And because I was a musician, I actually joined the marching band, the presidential marching band. And one of the things that they recruited for the marching band was tall guys, because they would do the baton thing, which had to be visible from the back of the parade of the marching band. And so almost always the tall guys also happened to play basketball. And so we had a amazing basketball team at the battalion. We actually won the intramural that year of all the battalions playing each other. So it was a fun time. And then when I went to university, I played a little there. And this was like through the 1991 to 93 timeline, which is the first three-peat of the Bulls around that time. So definitely, it was one of those things that it was like watching a Bruce Lee movie when you're 8 or 9 years old. You immediately want to go and kick the ass out of your brother, to see if you can repeat some of the things. Same thing with basketball and watching the Bulls.
Very, very cool. I haven't had a chance to watch that particular series yet, but I am looking forward to doing that. Although I did live it at the time. Like, if you lived in the Chicago area back in those years, I mean, it was like basketball everywhere. Everybody watched. Everybody talked about it. It was very, very crazy. Never seen anything
Yeah.
like that. Probably never will again. All right. Well, that's 5+ questions, I guess, with with Luis Giraldo. Thank you so much for playing. I hope you enjoyed that. We're going to move on to our museum pick. So, Luis, for this is the first time we've ever met. So I have a hobby of not throwing away old technology things. My wife calls it a disease. Either way, it is it is for the benefit of everyone that we can go back and look at all this old cool stuff. Rich has actually been to my house. He has seen my problem firsthand. He almost had me committed when he was here, but we managed to talk him out of it. It's a matter of time. So I do have one that I'm going to grab here. So this one actually did not belong to me, Rich. I am picking something that belonged to my lovely wife, believe it or not.
Okay.
But I just didn't let her throw it away. So I guess it's still my fault. It's still here. So this is, I'm going to talk about a keyboard. We haven't talked about keyboards in a while. And keyboards, Rich, keyboards don't get enough love. I'm going to tell you, they are the primary interface to computing devices since, well, as long as there's been computer devices, and even going back to that, to the typewriters. It is the most critical input device of any computer. And I dare anybody to argue that with me. They're even on phones. On your phone, there's a digitalized version of a keyboard. And if you do a lot of productivity work, if you type a lot, everybody knows that having a good keyboard is important. So my museum pick is an old one. This is I'm going to hold it up here for the camera for those who are watching on YouTube. For those who are watching or listening, this is what's called the Smart Keyboard. It is a split ergonomic keyboard design. I don't really know if that was a brand or if there was a. I don't know what brand this is. I think it's just a generic one. But my wife really likes the split style ergonomic keyboards. Personally, I cannot stand them. I don't know what your take is on the split ergonomic, but it is some people love them. So, you either love them or you hate them. I don't know of anybody that's like, I'm lukewarm on the whole split keyboard thing. But Luis, what is your take on the split keyboard?
Oh man, I think the split keyboard is like the snob equivalent of a Cisco network junkie. I just can't do the split keyboards, to be honest, primarily because I'm probably a bit of a typing hack. I kind of pretend like I position my hands properly on a keyboard, but, coming from a guy who did his first school reports on an actual typewriter, key travel and some consistency in key travel is important. And, the ergonomic layout, I just felt like was never the right thing for me. I just could never get into ergonomic keyboards. And so I definitely prefer a nice keyboard. I'm not as crazed about sort of the clackety mechanical ones as some folks that I know are, especially in the development circles. You find a lot of very, very hardcore fans of mechanical, noisy keyboards. So I like the sleeker, smoother, thinner Apple keyboard, for example. I've been a Mac user for a long time, but yeah, so no, not for me.
I think we've of the mechanical clackety ones, Rich, I believe I brought out the old IBM clickety clackety classic keyboard on the show before. And we've talked about that, but that's a standard keyboard layout, which is the kind of layout I prefer personally. And of course, I know when I'm like, 55 years old, I'll probably get diagnosed with carpal tunnel and then screaming, I learned how to use these. But
But is that one not a QWERTY layout, or is that
no,
something else?
this is QWERTY, but it's split.
Okay,
So
gotcha.
so once you go to the split layout, you really have to be subscribed to the whole like touch typing in its classical sense, because there's no crossing over once you go to this
Yeah.
style. And of course, like for those who are listening, this is the typical computer beige that was so big at the time, but it's like yellowed with age. And look, my wife even engraved her name on it. So this is again, you gotta love this kind of stuff. There's an easy button. I have no idea what the easy button does, Rich. We're
Do you
gonna
know
have
how
to.
old that is?
You know what? I don't actually, because I don't know when she got it originally. But my guess, she had it before we met, so it's gonna put it into the late '90s or early 2000s period would be my guess.
I
So
will
that's my.
say that keyboards and just peripherals in general are one of those things that feel like you can renew your approach to technology by just buying a new keyboard. All of a sudden, everything feels great again, from your relationship with the keyboard. My keyboard, which is an Apple wireless Bluetooth keyboard, look at the A there, is all worn out.
Yeah.
Just because that's the command A for selecting everything in a list, and I do a lot of that, command A delete. But yeah, I prefer sort of the slim wireless 100%. I don't know how people deal with wires these days, and I've definitely adopted my wife's Scandinavian minimalism of like keeping the desk as clear of objects as possible. So that
So Luis,
influences.
if your wife was here, she would look at my office and she would scream and go running down the street. It is that bad.
Yeah, she'd just probably close her eyes and try to feel her way out. Yeah.
So that's going to lead into my tech pick. There are a good number of people who really prefer an ergonomic style keyboard, and there are cheap generic ones. And I generally, when people ask my recommendation on an ergonomic keyboard, there's generally one that I always go for, and it's been on the market now for many years. And it's a great one, and they still sell it today because it's a great keyboard, and that's the Microsoft Ergonomic 4000. In fact, that's the keyboard my wife even uses these days. And it's if you like ergonomic keyboards, you can't go wrong. However, Microsoft recently released a new ergonomic keyboard that takes away some of the advanced. The 4000's got a zoom button in the middle, like a little rocker, and it's got all these other buttons around it. So it's a little bit more of a complex layout. But they released one that's a little bit simpler. And for those who are watching, I'm gonna throw a image up here of what it looks like. And for those who are listening at home, it's the Microsoft, what they call ergonomic keyboard. The not the Sculpt. I'm not a big fan of the key travel on the Sculpt, but this is kind of like they took the ergonomic 4000, they stripped a lot of the superfluous stuff around it, simplified it, and did kind of a little bit of a wave format with it. But I have not gotten a chance to put my hands on this particular keyboard yet. But it looks like a really nice compromise between ultra simple and a nice but a good layout that looks high quality. And usually with Microsoft, when they do full keys, they do tend to have a good quieter key with good key travel. That is nice. And this one is $59 MSRP. You can usually get it for about $40. It looks like a really nice keyboard for those who worry about carpal tunnel. What do you think, Luis? How many do you want?
Matt, I'm just sort of in amazement because it appears that you are actually in a full-blown fetish, keyboard fetish here, is what is I'm deducing from the situation.
There's posters on my office walls of keyboards and bikinis. And we got
TMI.
another possible show title, Rich.
Keyboards and bikinis, yeah.
No, I'm a
How-
big proponent of, for those who listen to the show a lot, they know I'm a big proponent of good quality input peripherals. They make a world of difference in the quality of work and your perceptions of how you do work and your productivity, and can radically improve the enjoyment of a computer. So I'm all about good keyboards and mice.
So I'm just pulling out an old relic of mine, which is a Canadian company actually called Matthias, with one T, no H, Matthias. And they make these keyboards that were Bluetooth enabled, but you could, these were one of the first ones that to do not only backlit keyboards as well, but also had the multiple keys to switch between different Bluetooth inputs. So I could tap one of these keys and type on my phone, or tap another one and actually switch over to my iPad or my computer. And so I've definitely get what you're saying. I've been focused also trying, and it's hard to like innovate on a keyboard. Like there's only so far you can go, I suppose, until you start to get into like just the flashy features like that. But I have definitely cared about the functionality, and so I can appreciate the fetish, Matt.
Well, that's good. I always enjoy meeting someone who can appreciate input peripheral attraction. I guess we'll just leave it at that before we dive way off into the weeds on that one. So that's my museum pick, the old Smart Key split key keyboard, and my tech pick, the new Microsoft ergonomic keyboard, not the 4000, although that's a great keyboard. I highly recommend you look at that one as well, if you like the split key style, but also this new ergonomic, simpler but looks like a nice high quality productivity based keyboard. Rich, what if you were to go back in time and see what happened and report on it today? What would you see? And then if you were to try to travel into the future and come back and report, what would we see?
Well, if I knew all the stuff that had happened in the past, this would mean I was cheating. What I had done is gone to the "In Case You Missed It" post that appears every Friday on ChannelProNetwork.com, because I don't write that. Our James Gaskin writes that for us. And this week, James is going to be reporting all of the news out of the Microsoft Build conference. We didn't touch on that, but huge. And this year, virtual developer conference build by Microsoft. So some interesting news came out of that. ArcServe and Sophos have deepened their technology alliance, which is kind of interesting from a BDR/security kind of play. And Jen James is going to talk a little bit about, they are playing professional baseball in South Korea again now, but not in front of an audience. He's got a story about a team that wanted to kind of fill in some of the seats at the stadium so that they didn't look quite so empty. Had a creative idea for that didn't quite work out, and you'll get the details in this story here. Now, looking ahead to next week, it is Memorial Day, of course, and that will limit the amount of news, I think, that comes out of the industry, but there will be some. And in fact, the latest quarterly meeting of the IT Nation Evolve peer groups, formerly known as HTG, will be taking place next week as well, but that's going to be virtual too, not in person this time. But that's what's on the agenda for next week.
Awesome. Well, that is going to wrap up episode 146. A big thank you to Luis Giraldo for joining us as guest host today. You did a fantastic job. What a great show we've had. For those who want to learn more about Ook Enterprises and maybe connect with you personally, how do they do that?
Just visit us on the site at ook.co. That's ook.co. Obviously, we're a typical MSP in that sense. The website's not going to be too groundbreaking, but it's an easy way to reach out. I'm on Twitter at Luis Giraldo. LinkedIn, of course, is an easy place for businesses to connect as well. So in all the different channels, I'm usually at Luis Giraldo. And
a note to our listeners and viewers out there, no, he will not set you up with Shakira if you ask. So just FYI on that. Well, that's
I'd
awesome.
have to be the one taking first dibs on that.
Smart man. Rich, we are ChannelProNetwork.com is our website. That's where people can find us. Go there each and every day for news, articles, resources, downloads, podcasts, You name it, all day, every day. Great things to help you do better with your business, grow your business, do things more efficiently, learn about new products and services that are out there. It's a wealth of information. It should be your first destination every single day. If you like ChannelPro Weekly, and I hope you do, we work very hard on it here. Definitely subscribe. We're all over the place. We're Google Play or Google Podcasts, iTunes podcasts. We're on Spotify. We're on Stitcher. Basically anywhere where you get podcasts, you can subscribe to us. Please do so and leave a good rating. That always helps. If you like to watch, we are on YouTube as well. Hit the red subscribe button and the bell to get notifications. And then each and every week as we get new episodes, poof, whether it's on your phone or on your computer and your email, you will know when more ChannelPro Weekly is available for you, so you can see us and great guest hosts like Luis Giraldo. We are ChannelPro Network on Facebook, at ChannelPro SMB on Twitter. We're on LinkedIn as well. You can search for us and find us there. Rich, you are what on the Twitters?
At Rich Free.
And I'm at Matt Whitlock. You can follow us there. And thanks everyone for watching. Thanks again to Luis Giraldo, and we will see everybody in episode 147 next week.